The city lights stretched out like an endless ocean at the very top floor of Whitmore Plaza, the most luxurious glass tower in New York. In this space cloaked in opulence, where CEOs, designers, and politicians jostled to the sound of clinking wine glasses and classical music, Eleanor Whitmore entered like a cold, sharp beam of light. She was the embodiment of the untouchable elite, a 32-year-old white billionaire head of Whitmore Digital, a tech empire known for its innovation, and its ice-cold-hearted CEO, a woman shaped by years in the spotlight and the superficiality of high society. Her ivory-white evening gown hugged a sculpted statuesque frame. The diamond necklace around her neck once belonged to her grandmother, the first woman in the family to rise from poverty. Eleanor moved through the crowd with an indifferent gaze and a smile just polite enough, her mind completely detached from the room around her. Then, in a moment that was either coincidence or fate, she turned into the wrong hallway. A service corridor meant only for staff. No chandeliers, no violins, only the scent of disinfectant, faded white-painted walls, and the clatter of an old fan. A voice suddenly called out from the shadows, "Careful with that door. It tends to jam. Might trap things I've never had, like a reputation." Eleanor turned around. In front of her stood a black man, short and heavyset, dressed in a worn janitor's uniform. He was holding a mop, having just cleaned up a spill. But what made Eleanor pause was his eyes. Calm, deep, and strangely bright, like a mirror that had never known fear. She flinched slightly, not because of his presence, but because of herself. Someone so used to power and flattery, yet suddenly feeling seen for the first time. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't know anyone was here." "That's the strength of this job," the man said with a soft laugh. "We're trained to be invisible." She laughed. A real laugh. A genuine one. Then, as if realizing she had revealed too much, Eleanor quickly tightened her expression. But instead of walking away like she always did, she asked, "What's your name, Marcus?" He replied, resting the mop in the corner. "And you already know who I am." Marcus nodded. "I do. But I prefer people to introduce themselves. It makes them more human than a brand." Eleanor went still. That line wasn't just clever. It was a gentle stab through the mask she always wore. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't fear. It was truth, the rarest currency in the world she lived in. And from that moment, something began to grow in a cold concrete hallway beneath the hum of a tired fan. Not for fame, not for power, but because two people who had accidentally strayed from their worlds truly saw each other for the first time. Eleanor had never set foot in the employee cafeteria. The service-level elevator was foreign territory, a faint gray line on the building's blueprint, never meant to be traversed by someone like her. But the next day, after a strategy meeting dragged on and the hollow phrases echoed in her head like knocks on an empty box, she suddenly found herself standing in front of a glass door labeled "Break Room, Staff Only." Inside, the scent of cheap coffee, the clinking of a vending machine, and plastic tables wiped down with minimal effort. No one noticed the white silk trenchcoat woman entering the room, except Marcus. He was seated in the corner reading a thick, worn-out book, Sapiens by Yuval Harari. The thick glasses made his eyes appear larger, but couldn't mask the sharpness in his gaze, as if he were analyzing the entire world with every line. Eleanor walked over and sat across from him uninvited. "Didn't expect you to be into modern philosophy," she said, gently touching the paper cup. Marcus looked up, smiling faintly. "We read plenty of things. People rarely ask." Eleanor said nothing, watching his hands rough, calloused, yet careful, as they turned each page. Instinctively, she pulled her collar tighter to shield the expensive silk from standing in the wrong place. "What do you usually read on break? History? Sociology? And whatever makes me feel like I'm not trapped in the basement forever. What about dreams, she asked. Do you have any? Marcus closed the book and looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether to answer truthfully. I dream of a day when people stop measuring each other by how high their elevator goes. A faint smile tugged at Eleanor's lips, this time a sad one. Because if anyone knew it was her, the elevators in this building didn't just take people upward, they also kept them locked into roles they were never meant to escape. A logistics staffer entered and startled to see Eleanor gave a clumsy bow. She stood up quickly, feeling the eyes of the whole room turn toward her. I should get back to the meeting, she said. But her gaze hadn't left Marcus. When you have time, you should try the coffee on the 58th floor. The espresso machine is imported from Italy. Marcus chuckled softly. Thanks, but I'm used to coffee that knows who it is. Eleanor didn't say anything more. She left her still warm paper cup on the table beside his book. On the cup, written in fine blue ink, were the words, "This cup isn't nearly as rich as the mind holding it." And for the first time in years, Eleanor walked out of a room not with pride, but curiosity. Eleanor rarely let anyone into her private world, especially not those the board of directors would label not of our class. But since that day, she began to notice Marcus's presence like a pause of silence amid the chaos. He had no idea that during a meeting on workforce restructuring, Eleanor had quietly reassigned his shift away from the areas slated for downsizing. Nor did he know that she skimmed through the service-level camera feeds each morning to ensure he was still on the schedule. She told herself it was just curiosity. On Thursday afternoon, the intercom buzzed. As Eleanor stood on the rooftop among the lavender planters she cultivated to ease stress. There's someone named Marcus here to deliver a package, the logistics guy from level 3. No one ever sent anything to Eleanor via building staff. She frowned but agreed. A few minutes later, Marcus entered, holding a small cardboard box, looking slightly confused. Someone asked me to bring this. I'm not sure. Eleanor looked at him as if the entire room had shrunk to just the two. But instead of taking the box immediately, she looked at Marcus and offered a faint smile. Do you know this is an executive floor? I do. People might assume I didn't know how elevators work. The remark made Eleanor laugh. On the contrary, I think maybe this floor needs someone who knows how to come up here without asking for permission. He placed the box on the desk. I doubt I'm welcome to stay long. She stepped toward the window where light slanted through the glass towers outside. Still facing away, she spoke slowly. I'm hosting an internal showcase tomorrow night for women-led startups, for those who've been underestimated. If you're not too busy mopping floors. She turned back to him, her eyes sharp but soft. Come. Marcus stood still for a beat, then nodded. I don't own a suit. Eleanor smiled. I'm not inviting the jacket. I'm inviting you. And just like that, at the top of a tower, many believed was reserved only for the elite, an invitation unspoken, without condition or judgment, had been extended. One that carried only this, a beginning. The exhibition was held in the high glass atrium of Eleanor Group, where crystal lights reflected across the marble floors like moonlit waves on water. That evening's guest list included some of the biggest names in venture capital tech founders and women's advocacy organizations. Everyone was dressed like part of the showcase, tailored suits, floor-length gowns sparkling with crystal and red heels gliding across the floor like a wordless soundtrack. And then, Marcus walked in. There was no alarm bell yet. The way the atmosphere shifted at that moment said it all. He wore a slightly wrinkled white shirt, carefully pressed old slacks, and worn leather shoes. He was not tall, not lean. It's not a seamless fit for the scene, but his eyes steady, bright, unbowed. Eleanor was speaking with the managing partner of a Boston investment fund when she paused at the sight of him. She left the group and walked toward him like no one else existed. You came, she said, her voice low enough for only them to hear. "I almost turned back the moment I stepped in," Marcus admitted, eyes flicking toward the curious stares. "But you didn't," Eleanor smiled. "I knew you wouldn't." Before he could say more, she held out her hand. "Come with me." And so, two people from entirely different worlds and opposite visions of the future walked side by side through a sea of gazes. Not because they were a perfect pair, but because no one could understand them. A sponsor whispered, "What is she doing with someone like him?" A nearby female founder overheard and smiled. "Maybe she's reminding us that dignity doesn't come with a name tag." When Marcus and Eleanor stopped at a booth displaying a clean tech project founded by formerly homeless women, he looked at the screen, eyes lit with reverence, as if seeing something far greater than himself. Eleanor tilted her head and asked softly, "What do you see I see?" "A chance the world got used to throwing away." She looked at him. For a long time. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor realized, it's not wealth or status, but the ability to recognize value where others only see disregard that is truly priceless. After the exhibition, Eleanor offered Marcus a ride home in her private car, but he gently declined, saying he was used to walking and liked the feeling of the city at night because it's less performative than the daytime. She watched him walk out of the building through the clear glass, his small figure swallowed up by the glittering streets. Inside her, an unnamed emotion flickered, equal parts curiosity and caution. The next day, she broke protocol. Eleanor left the office midday, not for a deal, not for an investor. She went to the neighborhood Marcus had once mentioned. The alleys were worn down and full of graffiti, the air thick with a mix of street food and music from public speakers. She knocked on the door of a small electronics repair shop where the sign had faded and the neon open flickered like it was about to give up. Marcus looked up from a tangle of wires, surprised to see her standing in an elegant cream suit, sunglasses pushed atop her head. "You lost." He grinned. "I'm looking for you," Eleanor replied plainly. "Do you have 15 minutes? I have 5, unless I want angry customers." "Good," she said, stepping inside as if it were her office. She stood in the middle of the shop, observing the wall covered in photos of children's certificates from non-profit groups, and an old clock stopped at 11:43. "Why do you never accept sponsorships?" she asked suddenly. Marcus paused. "Because sponsorship usually comes with conditions, and I've been one of those conditions, the kind people use to buy back their conscience." Eleanor stepped closer. "And what if I place no conditions? What if I want to invest in you with no expectation of return?" Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "That's a dangerous question, Eleanor." "Then let me ask another," she said, eyes locked on his. "What if I weren't a billionaire? What if I were just a woman coming in to fix her washing machine? Would you still look at me like you do now?" Marcus let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. "If you came to fix a washing machine, I'd still ask your name, but I wouldn't have had to brace myself for feeling this small." She fell silent. It was as if the emotional elevator between them had descended far below the floors of power and status, into a space where only truth lived. Whatever was forming between them was no longer something easily controlled. Eleanor turned to leave, but just as her hand touched the doorknob, Marcus said, "If one day you're no longer a CEO, I'd still offer you tea, not in crystal, but in the old ceramic mug my mother left me, because I figure you're tired of glass by now." She paused, then turned back with a faint smile. "Next time, lend me that mug. I'll wash it and bring it back." A week later, Eleanor showed up unannounced, with no assistant in tow and no limousine pulling up to the curb. She knocked lightly on the door of the small electronics repair shop on a sweltering afternoon. Marcus looked through the glass and nearly dropped his soldering iron. "I came to borrow the mug," she said, so serious it was almost funny. He led her to the small kitchen nook behind the shop. On the shelf was an old ceramic mug, its glaze chipped in places, with a faded image of a yawning cat. Eleanor examined it as if it were a priceless relic. "My mother used that mug every morning," Marcus said quietly. "After she passed, I kept it as a keepsake. I've never given it to anyone else." "Today's an exception," she asked. "No, today is the first time." They sat down surrounded by cluttered tools, the sounds of street traffic, and a creaky ceiling fan filling the silence. Eleanor held the mug with both hands, took a sip of tea, and closed her eyes. "It's strange," she murmured. "For the first time in a long while, I don't feel like I'm performing." Marcus looked at her. No flawless makeup, no designer dress or luxury watch, just a woman with slightly red eyes from lack of sleep, dry lips from stress, and a kind of fragility the world never allowed her to show. "You can be yourself here," he said. "No one needs you to be a CEO. No one needs you to be strong all the time." Eleanor set the mug down and looked him straight in the eye. "Aren't you afraid someone like me will ruin the peace you've built only if you try to hide the truth? But you're not doing that. And that is enough." That afternoon passed with no meetings, no contracts signed, no fanfare. But something more important occurred, a quiet honesty between two people from different worlds. Before she left, Eleanor gently touched the mug. "I won't take it with me, but I'll come back." "I don't need promises," Marcus replied. "I just need you not to vanish like every beautiful thing tends to do." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "I've disappeared from my own life for far too long, Marcus. Maybe it's time I find my way back." And then she left. Not like a billionaire leaving a poor neighborhood, but like a woman who had just entrusted her hope to an old ceramic mug, a symbol of something fragile, yet profound. Marcus's phone rang at midnight. He hesitated. No one called him at that hour unless it was urgent. On the screen, a name made his heart pause. Eleanor W. Hayford. "I'm sorry if I'm disturbing you." Her voice came through thin and exhausted. "I didn't know who else to call." Marcus sat up, the soft light of his desk lamp casting sharp, tense shadows across his face. "Are you okay?" "No, but I think I need to not be okay in front of someone who won't use it against me." Eleanor didn't go into details, and Marcus didn't ask. He said, "I've got tea. You can come by." 30 minutes later, a luxury SUV pulled up in front of the little electronics shop. She stepped in without a word, still in her business clothes now, wrinkled, her makeup nearly gone. She sank into the wooden chair, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus handed her a cup of tea. No sugar, no milk, just like last time. "The executive board wants me to pull out of the community fund," Eleanor said after a long silence. "They said it's a brand liability, that I have to choose reputation or compassion. And you," I wanted to slam the table and walk out, but I was afraid. For the first time, Marcus saw clearly the powerful woman in front of him, the one whose name followed billion-dollar numbers, had cracks, soft corners. She was just as uncertain as anyone else, standing between what was right and safe. "Money doesn't buy freedom," Marcus said calmly. "Freedom comes when you stop fearing the loss of what others think you should have." Eleanor gave a faint smile, sad but grateful. "I've spent my whole life proving I was worth something, and now it takes a computer repairman to tell me the one thing no one else dared say." "I'm not a repairman," Marcus replied. "I'm the guy who drinks tea with you at midnight." They sat there, not touching, not speaking further. Outside, the city didn't sleep. But on that dimly lit street corner, there was a silence that couldn't be priced. A quiet space where a billionaire woman was relearning how to trust, and a man long overlooked was becoming an anchor in the storm unraveling inside her. And once again, the cup of tea became a symbol of trust. Without condition. The next morning, Eleanor walked into the boardroom at Hayford Global with an unusual calmness. Her blouse collar was perfectly buttoned, the click of her heels steady on the marble floor. But her eyes, no longer cold like they used to be, were sharp as a blade, as if overnight she had shed the skin of the Eleanor they once knew. All the board members were seated, aged faces in expensive suits, watching her cautiously. "We need to talk about the situation on Brown Street," one member began. "The press is leaking photos and video of you with that black computer repairman. They're suggesting you're staging a humanitarian image for a political campaign." Eleanor gave a slight smile. Not the polite kind. It was the smile of someone no longer afraid of having power taken from her. "I'm not staging anything. I'm just learning how to be human." Another member cleared his throat. "Eleanor, you must understand, we've invested in an image. A CEO like you cannot be associated with people like that." "People like that?" Eleanor repeated, her voice low. "You mean poor people, black people, or people who are more decent than everyone in this room combined?" The room froze. "His name is Marcus, and he doesn't just fix computers. He teaches kids how to code. He repairs old laptops for families who can't afford them. And he's never used anyone to climb into a position of power. And you," Eleanor said, eyes scanning the room, "have any of you ever stopped to ask yourselves, what are we building besides money?" There was a moment of silence. Then her phone vibrated. A text from Marcus. "You okay? Need me to make tea?" She looked at the screen, then raised her head. "If you believe my reputation no longer fits this board, I'm ready to resign. But I will not abandon what's right to preserve this toxic silence." A chair scraped backward. Someone stood up. Then another. Not to object, but to clap. Not all of them, but enough to let Eleanor know she was no longer alone. Marcus was busy reassembling an old laptop at the shop that evening when the doorbell rang. He opened it and froze. Eleanor stood there in a deep navy coat. No makeup, no assistants, no designer sunglasses to hide behind. "I just turned down 12 board seats and 1 invitation to run for Congress," she said. "And you're here to ask for a cup of tea," she said softly, with a little faith in it. Marcus didn't say a word. He walked inside and poured the water, his hands trembling just slightly. He placed the cup in front of her, the same old white porcelain mug, now symbolizing everything they were building together. "I just gave up a lot," she said. "Are you sure? You still want to walk this road with someone like me?" Marcus smiled gently. "I don't love what you have. I love how you hold on to what's right." The news spread like a storm with no warning. Billionaire Eleanor Hayford rejects board for love with a black computer repairman. From penthouse to repair shop, the most shocking love story in finance this year. On social media, the hashtag Hayford and Marcus began to trend. Some praised Eleanor for her bravery, but most didn't. "This is a PR stunt. She's playing the princess saving the poor narrative. He's using her." At a small cafe near Marcus's shop, Eleanor quietly scrolled through the headlines on her screen. Across the table, Marcus said nothing. Neither needed to. They both understood. This pressure wasn't coming from them. It came from chairs they were never meant to sit in together. Eleanor looked up. "They're trying to turn you into a symbol. Or a puppet." Marcus set down his cup, his voice steady. "They don't know. I once had to hide my tech degree to get hired to fix laptops. They don't know I slept on my mom's floor for 3 years because I couldn't afford rent." "But I know," Eleanor said. "And they will. We're not going to hide." A few days later, they agreed to a live interview. National television. a sharp-witted female anchor with eyes that seemed to pierce through every crack. "Ms. Hayford," she began, "why would someone like you, heiress to a financial empire, Harvard alum, Forbes 30 under 30, fall in love with someone from a different class?" Eleanor didn't blink. "Because I've been around many people from my own class. None of them have taught me how to fix a computer or read pain through someone's eyes." The anchor turned to Marcus. "How do you feel when people say you're lucky in this relationship?" Marcus smiled lightly. "Luck is growing up with a mother who cleaned streets but taught me never to bow my head. Loving Eleanor, that's not luck. That's a choice." When the interview aired, public opinion shifted. It was no longer just an unusual romance. It became a national conversation about prejudice and the essence of humanity. A tech CEO invited Eleanor and Marcus to co-lead a digital education project for underprivileged children. A prestigious university invited Marcus as an honorary speaker for a course titled Tech for Underserved Communities. That night, in the small room Marcus still lived in, Eleanor sat on the floor beside him. It is surrounded by old hard drives, circuit boards, and dusty tech manuals. "We just did something I used to think was impossible," she said. "We loved, without asking anyone's permission." Marcus took her hand, rough and thick, the hand of someone who's used strength more than strategy. "You taught me how to dream. Now I want to turn our dream into a home." Eleanor looked at him. No longer a billionaire, just a woman in love, surrounded by wires and a flickering desk lamp. The Hayford estate looked like something out of an oil painting. Black gates trimmed in gold, a marble fountain, and every brick polished daily by people the family never bothered to name. Eleanor brought Marcus there in a rented modest car. No driver, no security. "If you want me to use the back door, I'll understand," Marcus said, half joking, half serious. Eleanor gently squeezed his hand. "No, they need to learn how to look someone in the eye." The dining room was a silent courtroom. Eleanor's father, Reginald Hayford's silver hair, cut as sharp as his dismissals. Her mother, Madeline, a face carved from aristocratic ice, her gaze only flickering when it landed on Marcus. "So, this is the computer repairman." Madeline enunciated each word like reading a stain off the porcelain. Eleanor didn't flinch. She nodded. "Marcus Clark, the man I love, the man I will marry." A spoon clattered against a china plate. Reginald said nothing. He rose and exited the room, as if a sudden fluctuation in crude oil prices required his urgent attention. The second half of the meal took place in the library, the battlefield of every Hayford family confrontation. "Eleanor, you know your place in this society," Madeline began. "You are the face of Hayford Holdings. A girl like you cannot fall for someone the entire board wouldn't bother to remember by name." Eleanor exhaled, setting down a teacup, the same chipped ceramic cup she used to drink from with her mother as a child, now a symbol of rigid traditions she once thought unbreakable. "I used to think you understood this world better than anyone, Mother. But it turns out all you understand is the fear of losing reputation, not love." Marcus remained silent, but his eyes never left Reginald. The aging billionaire stood in the corner, hands clasped, weighing the situation like a pending merger. Finally, he spoke, voice low and even. "What do you have to offer my daughter besides calloused hands and ideals nobody's buying?" Marcus took a step forward. He didn't lift his chin, but he stood tall. "I don't have an empire, but I have a promise. And I have a small company built with my hands developing energy management software for affordable housing. Not to impress, to live with purpose." Silence blanketed the room. Then Eleanor softly smiled and pulled a proposal from her coat pocket, a partnership plan to integrate Marcus's software into Hayford Group's upcoming smart property expansion. This isn't charity. This is a chance to prove that intelligence and trust don't come with a skin color or a BMI index. Madeline blinked. Her eyes twitched. Reginald flipped through the pages. Quiet. Then I closed the file and said, "If you succeed with this, Marcus, I'll be the first to shake your hand in the boardroom. But if you fail, don't expect to keep Eleanor." Eleanor didn't argue. She didn't defend. She looked at Marcus. He looked back. No fear, no pleading. "I don't need my parents' permission to love you," she said. "But if we want to go the distance, they'll have to learn to accept us." When the two stepped out of the Hayford gates, a light rain had begun to fall. No words were spoken. But Eleanor's hand found Marcus's, and this time it didn't tremble. A week after the interrogation at the Hayford estate, Eleanor and Marcus sat across from each other in a small conference room inside the Hayford Future Housing Tech Center, the very headquarters where Eleanor once commanded absolute authority without question. But this time, she wasn't there to issue orders, she came to persuade. "I'm not against testing Marcus's product," said Graham Lowell, the white middle-aged chief technology officer, eyes locked on the report in his hand. "But deploying it across 120 test buildings within 90 days is impossible." Marcus stood. No suit, no slides. "It's just a demo running on a scratched-up old laptop." But his voice was steady, deep, and there was no trace of apology. "We don't need 120 buildings. Could you give us 5 and 30 days? If energy bills drop by at least 20%, if residents are more satisfied, if the data holds you, let us proceed. If not, I walk." Graham chuckled dryly, then turned to Eleanor. "So you're putting a 4-year Hayford project in the hands of a self-taught engineer who used to deliver DoorDash?" Eleanor didn't blink. She replied, "I'm not betting on degrees. I'm betting on practical solutions, and I won't let your fear dictate the future." The trial began 5 days later. 5 buildings in the Bronx where winter energy bills often exceeded rent. Marcus worked 14-hour days with 3 fellow self-taught engineers. They rewired panels, installed sensors, optimized nighttime energy algorithms, and even taught residents how to use their app. "If an 80-year-old grandma can use this software to cut her electricity bill, then it deserves to exist," Marcus told his team. Eleanor visited each evening bringing coffee food and a notebook filled with resident feedback. One little boy gifted her a drawing Eleanor in a green dress, Marcus fixing a power box on a ladder with a giant red heart floating above them. On week 3, the system malfunctioned. A minor bug in the algorithm cut power in Zone 17B for 3 hours. The media pounced. Industry rivals mocked. Graham sent an urgent email. "Told you so. Pull the plug before this collapses." Eleanor didn't reply. She drove through the rain to the Bronx where Marcus stood on a rooftop soaked through fixing code with a public Wi-Fi signal and his laptop on his knees. "Are you sure you can pull this off?" she asked. Marcus looked up, exhausted eyes, but unwavering. "I'm not sure I'll succeed, but I'm sure I won't quit." On day 29, the first round of energy bills was distributed to residents. The result, an average reduction of 23.7%. Graham visited the building in person and saw it for himself. Residents thanked Marcus. An older woman was crying because she could finally run her heater all night without fear of going bankrupt. A single father said he could now afford books for his son. In front of the press, Graham shook Marcus's hand. Eleanor stood beside him and took Marcus's hand in hers. "You don't need to prove anything anymore," she whispered. "But they need to see you. They need someone like you in that room." That night in Eleanor's office, once filled with IPO documents and acquisition deals, now there were just 2 cold cups of tea. The old symbol of trust. Marcus asked, "What made you believe in me?" Eleanor leaned on his shoulder, smiling. "Because you didn't try to climb to the top of the building. You fixed it so others could rise too." News of the success of Project Light Up in the Bronx spread quickly. The press dubbed it the basement miracle, an energy-saving technology created by a short, chubby black man with no formal degree, silently but firmly supported by billionaire Eleanor Hayford. 3 weeks later, an email arrived from the Hayford Global Board of Directors. To Eleanor, Light Up Technology is now valuing the company at $9.3 billion. The board will proceed without you if you don't include it in the IPO roadmap. Attached is a condition: we will take full ownership of Light Up as an auxiliary branch. Marcus is not included in the executive list. Eleanor read the last line in silence. It was a choice between shares and a person, between a political chess move and the man she loved. That evening, Eleanor sat in the cramped kitchen where Marcus still lived. Not because he couldn't afford more, but because he refused to leave the community that raised him. "They want to IPO without you," she said, gripping the teacup, the very first symbol of them. "And if I refuse, they'll call me a traitor." Marcus didn't respond at first. He gently pried her fingers off the cup and held her hand. "If it's between me and your empire," he began. But Eleanor shook her head. "It's not between you and an empire. It's between a short-term dream and a long-term legacy." 2 days later, at a major press conference, Eleanor took the stage, not with a strategic deck, but with Marcus's tattered notebook filled with late-night bug fixes and optimization equations. In front of hundreds of investors, she declared Hayford Global will not IPO Light Up. Instead, we are transferring the entire technology to an independent, community-led organization to be run by Marcus Lambert. The room fell silent, because what we need isn't another product on NASDAQ, but a seed of fairness planted in every neighborhood. That evening, the clip of Eleanor rejecting the IPO went viral globally. From Nairobi to Oakland, thousands of young engineers began calling Marcus the T-shirt king, the man who built million-dollar tech without ever wearing a tie. 1 month later, Marcus founded Lambert Labs, a nonprofit organization developing environmental technology for low-income communities. The headquarters. The same old warehouse in the Bronx where Eleanor once brought him coffee on a rainy night. She held no official title in the company, but at every major meeting, she could still be seen sitting in the back row, quiet, without speeches, simply smiling, as Marcus presented the innovative grid plans for the upcoming year. One late night, they sat on the rooftop beneath the first string lights Marcus had ever hung for Eleanor. The wind was cold. He handed her a small box. Inside wasn't a ring, but an old USB drive containing the very first version of Light Up. Unoptimized, buggy, but the raw seed of a dream. "If one day we forget why we started," Marcus said, "plug this in. And remember." Eleanor didn't say a word. She reached into her bag and pulled out the first handwritten note he ever left her in the penthouse. "Your laugh made my day." She placed it next to the USB. A memory, a faulty program, a love that didn't need to be perfect, just real. Behind the empire, behind the lights and the power, were two people. A billionaire woman once lonely in a gold-plated elevator. A short, chubby black man once passed over like he was invisible. They didn't break the system. They asked a new question: where does true human worth lie? And the answer rested in how they looked at each other, as if the whole world were an unfinished building, and they were the two who stayed to fix it one brick at a time.